Okay. Hi, my name is Shannon Bennetts. I have OCD and I made a game about it. So the first thing to cover is what exactly is OCD. Let's break it down. OCD stands for Obsessive Compulsive Disorder. So obsession refers to that which the sufferer is fixated upon, usually a negative thought or intrusive thought that, for lack of a better word, intrudes on the mind of the sufferer. And compulsion refers to what the sufferer has to do in order to quell these thoughts. So in my case, for instance, there's certain rituals I have to perform to quell certain intrusive thoughts that come into my brain. So let's say I have a morally dubious thought that implants itself and it's telling me, oh, you've done this thing or you're going to do this thing. So to quiet that voice happening in the back of my head, which I'll get into a little later, I have to perform a certain action to deny it, basically, to deny that thought and say, no, I do not agree with this, and force it out. So let's say one of these thoughts comes in, depending on the severity, I might have to say, twist my hand like this, sort of make a fist and just crunch it, or something like that, just force it out sort of physically almost. I used to shake my head quite vigorously to like literally shake it from my mind, biting my hand, that sort of thing. So sort of inflicting, I wouldn't say inflicting pain in terms of like horribly hurting myself, but just some sort of physical reaction to say, no, I do not agree with this thought, it's not me, and I need to force it out bodily. So that is the compulsion, I guess. And disorder is disorder. It's not, part of the thing of doing this as well is that it's not something that's intrinsically linked to cleanliness. I'm not going to show you the rest of this room, but it is extremely messy. So it doesn't have to do with, necessarily have to do with cleanliness or order or needing everything straight or whatever. It's a lot worse than that. It's actually a lot darker than the stereotype is. And I guess part of making this was also to just get rid of that stereotype and say, hey, this is what we're dealing with, and it's not something to pretend to have or to joke about, because it's some heavy stuff. The thoughts can get very hectic and debilitating. You can become debilitated by them if it gets worse enough. I'm okay, like, don't stress about me. I've been fine for a while now, but it can get very hectic. Yeah, so that's my flavour of OCD, just in case you're curious. Yeah, so why make a game? I made this game in the second semester of honours, and the previous year, at the end of third year, I had a very severe and probably the most public OCD related breakdown that I've ever had. This was in response to an exam I was writing. I chose to not write with my peers, and I eventually had to be placed in the disability writing area, I guess. They gave me my own room, and it was awful. Screaming, shouting, hitting the table, just frustrated, grunting, all that, because it was just chaos in here. And that eventually got back to the lecturers, who they were very sweet about it, but they did, I think, find out about it and were being quite gentle with me. But one of my lecturers suggested that once I get to a point where I can work with it rather than being plagued by it, I guess, suggested that I work it into my art somehow. And yeah, I had considered it. I wasn't sure about it because, I didn't want to jump straight into it and compromise my already fragile being and, make anything worse, especially because that was a very hectic episode, probably the worst OCD related, as I said, the worst OCD related breakdown I've ever had. But yeah, so I didn't in the first semester, but once the second semester hit and I was thinking I'd start again and figure out what I was going to do, I thought about using that as a starting point. And luckily, once I thought about it, a lot of my work fit into it really nicely, which I'll describe to you in a minute. So I thought, you know, let's work with this. And that started out with a project on After Effects. But then I thought, what about a game? It uses all the skills that I have so far in terms of taking a model from creation to full animation, and I could learn something new in terms of I've never done anything game related before, so you know, learning Unreal Engine in that time could be a nice way to push it forward. But also, aside from that, gaming is a really good way to get the audience, what's the word? Interactive? I don't know if that's the word I'm thinking of. Basically, you're able to get lost in it very quickly. It pulls you in, and you're able to sort of inhabit whatever place they make for you, more so than other mediums. And getting the viewer into my headspace is something I've tried in my previous work, not necessarily, not at all OCD related, but sort of getting them into the space of me when I'm in the process of drawing, or seeing how I've interpreted music, how I've interpreted the act of drawing, that kind of thing. And what is the word? Interactive. Immersive. Sorry, yes. Oh, just going back to my artist statement. Frick, it's on my computer over there. But yeah, it's a very immersive medium, and it's something like with installations that I love, is that you can walk around in it, you can spend as much time as you want in it, and it becomes sort of an experience. And with the digital medium, it's not as immersive in that you can touch everything, you know, you're actually there, but it has this added benefit in that I can make whatever I want in the digital realm, like beyond the possibility of real life. So that's where the sort of give and take is with those options. And I had been toying with, you know, making a sort of an actual physical interactive space in which to view my animations, because I really was playing on this, like, get them where I am, you know, get into my headspace. And suddenly gaming was like, oh, I can do that now, you know. I mean, to a degree, and let's say try friggin' VR, which gave me hell-raising nausea, so I'm not going for that anytime soon. Well, maybe, who knows. There are some fantastic games which cover mental disabilities, or mental disorders, I guess. Two coming to mind are one that was introduced to me by a friend called Anxiety Attacks, where it actually simulates someone walking through the forest and being followed by this sort of dark force that represents anxiety. Once it gets too close, your vision becomes clouded with sort of veins and red and words, like negative words, and your breathing is restricted. So the main mechanic of the game is regulating your breathing, and it's about, you know, just calming down, breathing, getting it as far as you can, and you will get through it. And it's extremely immersive. I haven't played it. I've watched people play it, but it's you feel panicky when it's happening, and it's about, you know, panic attacks. And it's just this one little game mechanic suddenly, you know, can cover all of that and get you in that place. And I think it's a fantastic tool to get across to people who don't suffer from them what it's like. And you know, that was my aim. Another is Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, which I hadn't played before I made it. I only bought it a couple weeks after my game was done, but I've been following the development, and it's fantastic. They deal more with psychosis, which I actually didn't know about at all. I mean, I know the word, but having watched the development diaries and played the game, it's really an in-depth look at it, and it's amazing. I mean, you feel so much empathy for the main character, and I read some things on it talking about how once you've accepted her logic, you just have to sort of go with it and complete the game. And it's so interesting how normal the symptoms become after you've gone through it for a while. And I mean, not to belittle the disease in any way, but it's just being able to accept that this is how she is and this is how she can function, but she can function beyond this, is just great. I mean, it's amazing. It's an amazing game. You should really try it. So let's talk about the characters and why they are how they are, and just a bit of backstory. I've written so much about this in artist statements and journaling, and I really just want to get it out and let you know. If you have, not to be presumptuous, but if anyone has any ideas about what the game is meant to, means to them, what it represents to them, what it could represent, I'd really enjoy if you could let me know. Just write it. It's so weird to write it down in the comments. But yeah, I'm very curious as to what other people thought of it before I go into it and like break down every single friggin' design decision before then. If you could just let me know. I'm intensely curious. You don't get too much feedback in terms of that unless you ask for it. So yeah, if anyone has any comments, please let me know. Yeah, so let's cover the NPCs, the non-player characters. So we have a couple figures who are made out of lines and who are drawing lines on the walls. About 3 or 4 figures of those. Another one is white, covered in drawings herself, and the final is a self-portrait of myself. So the game itself is autobiographical in a sense. It's sort of a very large self-portrait, wherein I am trying to sort of visualize the disease as figures. So you go through the game as yourself, technically it's first person, and come across these strange markings along the floor and walls. You are going through identical rooms aside from these markings, and eventually you come across a figure who is seemingly made out of these same markings and drawing them on a wall with quite a strange arm like this. Just drawing these markings. Once you get close enough, it looks at you and runs away. Following it into the next room, you come across 3 or more of these figures, each again drawing, some of them attached to these lines that they're creating, and just a constant loop on what they're doing. Aside from, if you get too close to the characters, they will twitch and just look uncomfortable and sort of repeat a twitching motion should you get too close to certain ones of them, and resume what they were doing once you move away. After this, you come into a room with a single figure in a much darker room who begins... I call that one the dancer. I guess it's a dance. She starts sort of reacting on you, coming closer, but it's not just that quick repeated motion this time. It's a full sequence representing the... I'll get more into it, but doing sort of the rejection, but even more so that her body contorts. And this is something that I really wanted to get across, is that the sort of, as with before, the internal made external, in that her body is actually contorted as I feel mine needs to deny these thoughts. So when you first approach her, it looks like she's screaming. She's not actually properly screaming. I mean, it could be, but her rib cage sort of folds up into her chest. This folds up into her rib cage, and she pushes out, and her mouth opens, and that's the rejection, like a full vocal, I guess, rejection of the thought, and pushing it out like it needs a physical way out of the body, I guess. She then moves on to a dance sequence focusing on the hands and their movements, and that was from a variety of influences to do with dance. So the hand movements, it relates to how a lot of my sort of, for lack of a better word, and borrowing from Tourette's, the tics I do, or the rituals, I guess might be a better word, have to do with the hands. And so it becomes sort of an expressive dance of whatever I was feeling at the time. I put on a song and took all of the footage for that in my garage, and just, you know, whatever I felt my hands wanted to do, I did that for the sequence and used that. And it goes back to a dramatist that we studied in high school called Grotowski. I can't remember his first name, but his sort of dancing philosophy was also to do with just letting go of any presumptions. It's about letting the body do what it wants to do, let it move how it wants to. Don't use sort of tricks that you've learned about dancing and acting. It was a lot to do with acting, but I quite enjoyed the dancing aspect of it, where it relates to what I have to do is that I will contort my body in the way that it feels I need to get it out. So for instance, if I feel it needs to come out the neck, I will move to affect that area and get it to, I guess, strain or be pulled taut or contort or whatever I need to do for that to go out. And that relates to his, in that if you feel your arm needs to move or whatever the case may be, you just let it go and just work on it, exaggerate it, etc. So that's where that sequence came from, yeah, among other things. Moving beyond that room, you come to a bridge made out of the markings. So you'll cross that and see a figure at the end who almost looks like they're covered in white paint with these black markings on top of them, and sort of a Jackson Pollock kind of vibe, I guess. And upon approaching them, you see that you are in fact me, or a realistic version of me, as opposed to these quite expressive versions. You walk up to this figure and lift your hand to stroke the figure's face, and then rip a part of its face open, pulling away a section of the face to reveal a realistic face, or a human face, underneath that, leaving you to wonder who is the real me, I guess. And yeah, as sort of ambiguous as that is, I would like to sort of tell you at least my thinking around the entire thing. Feel free to think whatever you want. But yeah, I just want to detail, you know, who are the figures, who is the final person versus who do you play as, who are you playing as, and why do you have such an effect on the other characters. And yeah, I guess things have their mystery, but I'd rather explain it, I guess, because I like, you know, getting out all the thoughts that I have, rather than being like, oh, it's a mystery. It's like, no, there were reasons for everything. Yeah, so going back to the first figures that you meet, the ones that are made just out of lines and seem to have spaces in between, these figures are sort of an amalgamation of the kind of work I've been working on for quite a while now, from fine art, from a trick pretty much onwards, in that I've been working with gestural and expressive drawing versus realistic drawing. So, you know, just letting your pen go, your paintbrush go, just going, feeling more than being very strict and realistic and trying to get it perfect. And trying to find a balance between the realism, which I enjoy visually, but find less exciting to do, and the gestural drawing, which maybe even abstract drawing if you were to go that far, and how it's more fun to do, but I don't necessarily like the product. I like something to look at least sort of like something else, but I really enjoy when it's made out of broken lines and it's, you know, all put together, but it still comes into a face, or you know, whatever it has to be. And there's a couple artists that I've been looking at who, you know, work with that, and I've tried to experiment with that myself and try out ways to get that same effect, to varying degrees of success. And yeah, so that suddenly perfectly encapsulated how I could talk about OCD. And that came through on a weird 2 a.m. walk outside where I was recording just talking about my OCD because I wanted to get just all the information down and work from there. And yeah, and I was thinking about this expressive versus realism and how the expressive work can represent, and has represented some of my work, the internal landscape, I guess. So your thoughts, your emotions, that kind of thing can be expressed through these lines, versus the realism, which is the external, the face, you know, that what you see, but that which covers that what you don't see, I guess. And how I could place these two separate things as the two players, I guess, in OCD, because the way I rationalize OCD is that I have me, and that's me, that's the actual Shannon human, and what I refer to as my brain, which is the source of the intrusive thoughts, and that thing sort of at the back of my head that is creating and injecting, for lack of a better word, these thoughts into my mind. So that's my brain versus me. And in the beginning I was like, okay, so I can describe my brain section, the OCD, as this expressive, sort of angry, threatening, like spiky, I guess, with the drawing thing that attacks the realistic portrayal of myself, which would then represent me. But then I thought about, what about reversing those? It's where I view the brain part as this very clinical, malicious figure, I guess, if we are going to talk in terms of how the game turned out, that knows where to target me and knows exactly how to work, and that is the calm entity that is able to mess with me and, you know, would maybe be more easily explained in terms of being the realist side. So that's sort of, I think, the vibe that a lot of people get, and what they're sort of meant to get throughout the game, is that these figures that are made out of the lines, the abstract figures, are the OCD and maybe this negative force, these scary things. But that's not the case. Yeah. So yeah, the OCD is this calm clinical saboteur, basically. And I instead am reduced to the emotional, distraught mess, I guess, that this other thing is tormenting. And so I thought, why not subvert what I had previously done? And I've worked with sort of abstract lines a lot throughout, I don't know, my student career. I'd worked with abstract lines as a way of expressing emotion, as I said before, but just abstract before I thought to bring realism into it. Just maybe putting on music or being angry or whatever it is, and just taking a piece of charcoal and just going. And there's something about those lines that I guess it's not so much the final product, but the making of those lines that is getting the emotion out. And that is eventually what the figures were made out of. And so to represent the internal emotion externally, they became those markings and they created those markings. And so they are the amalgamation of those internal emotions made made human, I guess. And I mean, throughout my work, I'd wanted to get across the fact, or rather the act of creation, of making those lines and getting that emotion in the making of those lines. You know, what are you feeling then, and how are you getting it out? And I tried in the animations to capture that, but I don't know if I fully could. But regardless, that's sort of where I was going with these characters. And it turned out to be quite a good metaphor, in that these characters made up of lines were then creating lines, instead of taking, you don't see it, but I guess taking what they are comprised of and forcing it out through this tool of the arms, which are actually large pieces of charcoal on each, from the forearm upwards, and forcing them out onto a physical plane of the wall. And the charcoal arms are quite significant in that not only is charcoal the tool by which I can express emotion through my drawing, but it is also representative of my hands being the tool with which I exorcise, I guess, exorcise the thoughts that I don't want in my head. And you know, if I'm doing that and I'm releasing it, it is akin to the way that the charcoal figures are able to draw out their internal nonsense, I guess. Yeah, so the hand becomes a tool, the hand is the tool. So these figures represent me, and me at the point where I am deeply affected by the OCD and what I have to do. And it's this repetitive motion of having to repeat these rituals over and over to rid myself of the thought. And it's again this it's always a cycle of sort of thought and then ritual, thought, ritual, just to get rid of it. And that's what I try to get across in the looping. And yeah, they're actually the victims, I guess, in the game, in that they are tied to this. I mean, some of them are actually attached to the lines coming off the wall. The one figure with the circles, and again the circles is relating to the cycle, the cyclical nature of it. That one particularly is on a loop, and it's actually forced back to drawing. It draws, finishes, gets up, walks off, and is actually pulled physically, its flesh pulls it back to have to continue that loop. And it's again that invisible force pulling back and having to quell it again and again. So that just leaves the final figure and you as the player. And the final figure is, I think, the solid version of me. So that is probably the closest, now that I think about it, to the actual me in the game. The other sort of see-through figures would be the representation of how I deal with it. But the end one is me, and it is facing the illness, which is represented by the realistic version of me. And you walk up to this final figure who is again reacting to the presence of the player who is playing as the disease. Just as the others, you know, once the player gets too close, they react even more so. It becomes more erratic, whereas it was sort of a more of a, I guess calmer ritualistic thing in most cases, which is just going and maybe grinding harder to represent really like having to force it out. But once the player gets too close, it actually becomes quite erratic and distressing to them, which only goes away once they move away. And that's just representing how this force is able to have, or how it has such an effect on me and on these characters. So once you get to the final character, again, she is reacting quite quite badly to his presence, but she is angry and not taking any of its shit. And yeah, the scene was just to reveal that I am these distorted characters. Yeah, that last part was kind of playing up the idea that it's sometimes hard to distinguish between the two forces. So let's say me and my brain. Personally, usually I can pick out, what is absurd and yet affects me quite badly. So like an absurd intrusive thought that I know isn't true, but which is so convincing that I will react very badly. But there are sometimes sort of more subtle things where I'm like, is this me? Are these my thoughts? Or is this the mental illness just coming in? And that sucks because you can't always trust yourself. So that was sort of playing into that as well, where throughout the game you're not entirely sure who's who, and well, I hope you're not entirely sure who's who, and where I end and the illness begins, kind of thing. It's heavy stuff, but I did need to reveal that, like, no, these potentially scary, I don't find them scary, but potentially scary figures made out of lines are actually, there's a human in there, and that's actually, me there. And I needed that final scene to sort of reveal that. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And again, all of this is speaking from my experience. It could be very different for other people. This is just a personal thing. I'm happy with how it turned out. It was definitely a big project, but I liked it, and it was something different. And I'm pretty decently open about any OCD questions you have. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's a defining factor of my personality, if anyone's wondering. I mean, like, I'm pretty sure most people don't know I have it, so it's not a large part of my personality. It's just something I gotta deal with. So take that as you will, I guess. Yeah. Sorry, I'm tired as shit. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, any comments, please let me know. I'd love to chat about it, or anything you want to talk about. Yeah, nice talking, and hopefully we'll see more of each other soon.